Hello and welcome back to Ever So. I'm Ever, and this will be the reading of chapter 9 and 10 of The Clairvoyant Boy by Marilyn Mayhem on AO3. Hitoshi wasn't having a good day. He hadn't slept well the previous night, so he was exhausted. He hadn't even been able to drink any coffee, as Aizawa had finished the last of it. Hitoshi also didn't have any time to eat breakfast, as he had to chase around Bastard, the cat, in order to get back his tie. And to make matters worse, Bastard hadn't even looked guilty. Hitoshi had thought that maybe the day would be able to turn around, but when he was handed back his math test, he knew there was no going back. Even though Hitoshi had tried his absolute hardest on the test, he still hadn't been able to pass it. Hitoshi thought it was kind of stupid. What kind of hero would need to know how to find the factors of polynomials? So, when Hitoshi had been approached by two jerks from his middle school, he wasn't even surprised. The leader of two was a shorter boy with a truly atrocious haircut. His quirk let him make his limbs really heavy. The other boy was tall and lanky, with a long braid going down his back. His quirk let him stretch out his arms as long as he wished. "Look who we have here!" the ringleader teased. "A villain in a hero school?" The lanky boy laughed. Hitoshi had to stop himself from gagging on this terrible breath. When Hitoshi didn't respond, the leader grew agitated. He harshly poked Hitoshi in the chest. "Hey, I'm talking to you!" Hitoshi scolded. "Can you just leave me alone? You're being a nuisance. Nuisances aren't even good." He walked away, the shorter boy's hand. The leader bared his teeth before harshly shoving Hitoshi to the ground, his now heavy limbs preventing Hitoshi from regaining his balance. Hitoshi crashed to the floor. He could taste blood in his mouth from where he bit his tongue on the way down. "Are you trying to use your quirk on me?" the leader jeered. "Try it again, and you will regret it. I'll make you wish you were..." The boy was interrupted by the nearby supply closet swinging open. In the doorway stood a very surprised Midoriya. Green eyes blinked before locking onto the two bullies. All nervousness and kindness Hitoshi had known the boy for disappeared as Midoriya glared daggers at the two. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his tone murderous. The lanky bully quickly went to defend himself, not wanting to be on the other side of Midoriya's range for much longer. "We're teaching him a lesson. He thinks he's better than us, probably waiting for the perfect moment to enslave us and turn us into villains. We're just making sure he knows his place. His quirk is brainwashing, after all." Hitoshi winced, waiting for Midoriya's angry gaze to be turned onto him. Midoriya's glare deepened, but did not turn to Hitoshi. If he weren't already on the floor, Hitoshi might have fallen over in surprise. "Okay?" Midoriya crossed his arms, briefly glancing to the side before his eyes resumed glaring at the bullies. "I don't see a problem with that." Lanky spurred. "Well, you see, he can make you do whatever he wants." "Is that so?" Midoriya asked, stepping closer to the two boys. They both nervously looked at each other and nodded. "Tell me," Midoriya pretended to inspect his nails, "do you recognize anyone by the name of Kei Shoda?" Even though the name meant nothing to Hitoshi, it must have been someone important. Based on the way the both bullies' eyes widened in horror, Hitoshi assumed it was someone from his old middle school, as the name was ever so slightly familiar to him. Yeah, I know who she is." the leader finally gathered the courage to say. She used to go to our school. That confirmed Hitoshi's theory. Midoriya smiled slightly. Hitoshi could feel a bead of sweat trickle down his neck. Perfect, Midoriya said with a fake sweetness. Then you remember what you did to her? The horror on the bully's face seemed to double. Hitoshi would have laughed if he wasn't so terrified himself. The tall Oboro opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. A quiet tapping echoed in the hallway as Midoriya bounced his finger on his chin. I wonder what would happen if the principal found out what you did. You know, it does say that bullying is strictly prohibited in UA. Hitoshi watched as Lanky swallowed. Leader was trembling slightly. Did you know her brother goes here? Midoriya asked, raising an eyebrow. He's in the hero course. I'm sure he would love to know who was responsible for what happened to his twin sister. All the color seemed to drain from the two boys. Hitoshi could see the sweat gathering on their foreheads. So, Midoriya eyed the two boys. Unless you want everyone in the school to know what you did, do a little spin. Some of the horror on the bullies' faces turned to confusion as they looked at each other. When they saw the seriousness on Midoriya's face, they hesitantly spun in a circle. Midoriya smirked slightly when the boys faced him. Do it again. The bullies spun again, slightly less hesitant this time. Sit down, Midoriya said, directing a finger to the floor. Hitoshi watched in awe as the bullies complied. Now, apologize. The boys were much more hesitant, taking a moment to look at each other and then Midoriya, who just raised an eyebrow. Hitoshi nearly gasped when the first, I'm sorry, was spoken, and Hitoshi couldn't find it himself to close his jaw when more apologies followed. Hitoshi couldn't help but stare at Midoriya in adoration, who was high-fiving the air? That was odd. When Midoriya's eyes landed on Hitoshi, they widened slightly, before he turned back and glared at the boys. Apologize to Shinso. The bullies turned to Hitoshi, and they began to apologize. The lanky one even went into specifics, apologizing for all the times he called Hitoshi a villain, for being a total asshole, and for that one time he put mud in Hitoshi's food. Wait, Hitoshi didn't remember the last one. Midoriya walked over to Hitoshi, motioning with his spare hand for the boy to finally get off the filthy floor. Hitoshi scrambled up to stand beside Midoriya, and the bully stayed on the floor. When Midoriya began walking down the hallway, Hitoshi followed, not really knowing what to do with the apologizing boys. He ran into Midoriya when the greenette stopped. By the way, Midoriya called down the hallway, turning back towards the bullies. I just meant you do whatever I want, and I don't even have a quirk. I recommend you thinking about that before you bother Shinzo again. Midoriya continued down the hallway. Hitoshi scrambled to keep up. For someone with such short legs, Midoriya sure was a fast walker. When the two had traveled a respectable distance from the bullies, Midoriya stopped and put a hand on the wall, his breathing slightly faster than usual. Oh my god, that was terrifying, Midoriya said to no one in particular, not even looking in Hitoshi's direction. Are you okay? Hitoshi walked around Midoriya so that he stood in front of the boy. Midoriya seemed to startle, as if he wasn't expecting Hitoshi to still be with him. His face quickly morphed back into a smile. Yeah, I'm fine. How are you? Are you hurt anywhere? I have a first aid kit in my backpack if you need it. Hitoshi shook his head. All good. They didn't do any damage this time. He mumbled the last part under his breath, but apparently Midoriya had supersonic hearing because he seemed to catch what Hitoshi had said. If they pick on you again, come get me. I'm not afraid to expose them and get them expelled. In fact, I might just do that anyway, but I will sleep on that. The head not being used to prop Midoriya up the wall waved around, but never came close to Hitoshi's personal space. Hitoshi could feel his face flush in embarrassment. Okay, I will. What did they even do? How do you know all that stuff? That seemed to stump Midoriya. He turned his head slightly, as if listening to something, then nodded slightly. Hitoshi wouldn't have caught it if he hadn't been looking. He bullied someone pretty badly a few years ago. UA has a no bullying policy, so I know it wouldn't fly here. Pretty sure Nezu would expel them if he found out. Hitoshi nodded. That doesn't answer my second question, though. How do you know that stuff? Midoriya winced, as if he wanted Hitoshi to forget about that. I was friends with her? He said it like a question. Yeah, I was friends with her. Hitoshi narrowed his eyes. He's almost certain now Midoriya is lying. Sure. Midoriya swallows. Hitoshi feels bad for making the boy nervous. Doesn't matter much to me, Hitoshi said. Everyone's entitled to their secrets. The tension in Midoriya's shoulder eased slightly, but didn't disappear. Hitoshi looked around the hallway. There wasn't anyone else nearby. It was a perfect opportunity to apologize for his hostile attitude. Hitoshi took a deep breath as he turned to the shorter boy who was staring at the wall. Hey, Midoriya? The boy turned towards Hitoshi and raised an eyebrow. I wanted to apologize for how I have been treating you. I thought you didn't like me because of my quirk, and I was mad at you for that, but now I know that I didn't realize that isn't the case. I feel really bad, so I'm sorry. Hitoshi tried his best not to look at the ground in embarrassment. His parents always told him an apology meant more if you looked someone in the eyes, so Hitoshi was doing his best to take their advice. He wasn't really used to apologizing to people, as most of the ones he came across were jerks. Midoriya's head whipped to stare Hitoshi in the eyes. Hitoshi blinked in surprise when the shorter boy searched his expression. When he didn't find anything, Midoriya's jaw opened slightly. It was as if nobody had ever apologized to Midoriya before. But you know I'm crookless. Why are you apologizing? Hitoshi could hit himself. He was pretty stupid to have missed it, but it was obvious Midoriya hadn't been shown a lot of decency in his life. He probably didn't have very much experience with people apologizing to him, the same as Hitoshi. It also explained why Midoriya was so jumpy, and why he hated teachers. Hitoshi knew from experience that children are cruel, and his teachers hadn't really done much. Rather than voicing his thoughts, Hitoshi smirked. As underdogs have to stick together, right? Midoriya scanned Hitoshi again, his eyes worrying, calculating. He turned to look at the opposite wall again. Hitoshi really didn't understand why he kept doing that. Yeah, okay, Midoriya mumbled, looking into Hitoshi's eyes. Do you want to be friends? It was Hitoshi's turn to be surprised. He hadn't really had friends before. There were a few kids when he was in elementary school that had been nice to him, but most of the people in his middle school were assholes. Although Hitoshi assumed the same was true for Midoriya, as he had to look rather hesitant when asking. At least that made things easier. Neither of them could blame each other for being awkward. Sure, Hitoshi smiled. Just letting you know I'm going to transfer into Hero Course. I don't care what anyone else says. I'm finding a way to be a hero. Although Hitoshi couldn't see it himself, he knew there was a fierce determination in his eyes. Midoriya nodded. Are you going to get in through the sports festivals? I know they sometimes let students transfer that way. I read somewhere that you just have to place, so you wouldn't have to win or anything. Besides, I overheard from Class 1A's teacher already explained to students, so there was plenty of room. Hitoshi blinked. He hadn't actually known about that. Hitoshi had honestly just been planning on flunking the sports festival and instead of spending his time on figuring out the way to transfer. His glad Midori had told him about the festival before it happened. Hitoshi couldn't even imagine how angry he would have been with himself. I mean, I guess I am now, Hitoshi shrugged. How about you? Are you trying to get into the hero course too? Midori shook his head. No, I could never become a hero, he said with a sad smile on his face, like he had accepted the fact that his dreams were impossible. I bet you could. Hitoshi stuffed his hands into his pockets. People may have told you it's impossible, but there are plenty of heroes that fight quirkless. President Mike can't use his quirk very much because it does too much damage. Snape can't use his quirk in short range because he doesn't have the time to pull out a gun. It would take a lot of work, but you could do it. Hitoshi hadn't meant to give a huge speech, but the way Midoriya's face slightly lighted up while he was talking was enough to get him to keep going. Midoriya's eyes were wide as saucers. Hitoshi suspected nobody had ever told him that before. Then he smiles. Thanks. I think I'm okay where I am, but I would be happy to help you get into a hero course. It might be easier to win the sports festivals if there's two of us. Hitoshi grinned, something he had practiced with Shoda. I think that's a great idea. Now, come on. Let me show you about the spot I was talking about the other day. We can brainstorm. In Chapter 10, The Ghost of Street Smarts. Izuku sat on the ledge of the roof, the cold concrete chilling his legs. He didn't mind the numb feeling creeping into his limbs. It helped cool him down after chasing criminals all around all night. Normally, after alerting Tsukauchi to any suspecting activity, Izuku would leave the scene, but because he didn't really have to worry about Tsukauchi catching a glimpse of him, he had decided to stick around and watch the police make their arrest. The surprise on Tsukauchi's face had been worth it, as the detective had stopped in his tracks while Izuku waved at him. Izuku contemplated bringing him a coffee next time. The man looked exhausted. Izuku's head turned when he heard Oboro snicker. Eraserhead didn't have any patrols that night, so the ghost had decided to hang out with Izuku. Unlucky for the both of them, Tsukauchi needed help. At first, the detective hadn't been sending Izuku any cases, most likely due to the fact that he was working with a child. That had sent Izuku into a panic, as he was worried he wouldn't be able to afford his apartment anymore. But Tsukauchi eventually gave in, and had sent Izuku a folder of cases he needed help with. Now Izuku was slowly ticking off the cases, and only had a few more simple ones to go through. Izuku took a moment to just sit on the roof ledge with Oboro beside him, breathing in the chill air. He had been running around and speaking to ghosts all night. It had been easier with Oboro around, as the ghost was quite good at guessing criminal hangout spots. Izuku guessed it was because of Eraserhead's patrols that Oboro tended to join. It helped Izuku finish his endeavor at double the rate than usual. He might start asking the ghost to tag along more often. Izuku took in one more deep breath before going to stand. "We should get going," he said to the still snickering ghost. "I have a math quiz tomorrow. I need at least a little bit of sleep." Oboro frowned at Izuku. "You should be getting a healthy 8 hours, not the usual 5. "Usual 4, Izuku corrected absentmindedly, wincing when Oboro glared at him. "It's not that bad," he tried to deflect. "I can always nap in English if I'm tired." Oboro's glare deepened. "You could, but you won't. I know you don't trust your classmates enough to fall asleep near them." The ghost crossed his arms. Izuku spun away to avoid the older teen's gaze. "Well, then we best get going." He jumped down to the first layer of the fire escape with a loud clang. Oboro followed, but his steps were silent. "You're not getting out of this," the ghost floated after Izuku. "I'm not letting you get away with your bad sleeping habits anymore." Izuku kept walking down the metal steps. The clanging stopped when Izuku finally reached the bottom of the fire escape, his boots making a dull thud against the concrete. He stopped for a moment to let Oboro catch up, but the thud did not fade. Izuku quickly whipped his head to where he could hear a separate pair of boots. A tall and frankly charred man stood at the mouth of the alley, his long trench coat brushing across the dirty road. The strange man's footsteps stopped when he spotted Izuku. The two stared at each other, trying to gauge the threat of the other person. Oboro took advantage of his invisibility and circled the man, studying him from head to toe. He even showed his hands through a few of the man's pockets, and most likely feeling over for weapons. When Oboro was done, he turned back to Izuku. "He's got the switchblade in the front left pocket, but no other weapons." Izuku still didn't let his guard down. He assumed the man had a powerful firework if his skin was anything to go off of. Izuku stood up straighter, trying to appear more relaxed while still keeping on guard. He was worried that this strange man might be one of the criminals from the warehouse he had just turned in. If it was, then Izuku was a bit stuck. On one hand, he didn't want any of the criminals getting away, but on the other, Izuku was afraid that the man may attack him for ratting him out. "Are you from the warehouse?" Izuku placed a hand on his hip and switched his weight onto one foot. Oboro narrowed his eyes at Izuku. "Be careful. I don't trust this guy," he warned. Trying to not gain the strange man's attention, Izuku waved dismissively at Oboro, hopefully communicating that he knows what he's doing. "No," the man says, his voice gruff. "You?" He sticks his charred hands into his pockets, no doubt clutching the switchblade that Izuku knew was hidden. Attempting to lighten the mood, Izuku huffed. "Who do you even think threw them in?" He raised an eyebrow, even though it couldn't be seen. The sunglasses he wore covered his upper face pretty well. The strange man looked Izuku up and down. "You did that? You look like you're only 12. Oboro let out a surprised laugh, while Izuku just squeaked. "I am not 12! You're way off!" He waved a finger to chastise the man. "The name's Dabi." Izuku could barely hear the name over Oboro's giggles. "What about you?" Waiting a moment for Oboro's laughter to fade, Izuku organized his thoughts. "You can call me Deku." Izuku leaned against a nearby dumpster, using an arm to prop himself up. Dabi shrugged. Works for me. You up for ice cream? There's a 24-hour convenience store around the corner, and I don't have anything to do. When Izuku opened his mouth to respond, he was interrupted by observing Ghost. Izuku Midoriya, you better not be planning on going with this guy. Haven't you heard of the term stranger danger? Do you want ice cream? It's the most common phrase used by a kidnapper. Izuku used his left hands to finger spell a response, hiding his answer from Dabi. He doesn't have any ghosts. I'm sure that if he was a kidnapper, he would have at least one ghost, either a child or a vengeful mother. Besides, the self-defense lesson you've been giving me have a big help. I'm sure I could hold my own. Oboro didn't look convinced. Izuku, this is not a good idea. You're going to be exhausted tomorrow, and I'm going to bully you for it. Just trust me on this one. Izuku signed back. I've been doing this for a long time. I know what I'm doing. Knowing he wouldn't be able to change the younger teen's mind, Oboro huffed. Fine, but I'm coming with you. He crossed his arms. Jeez, sometimes I feel like a single mother worrying about you. Oboro mumbled to himself. Sounds good to me. As long as you're not some sort of creep planning on kidnapping me. I don't have a powerful quirk if that's what you're after. Izuku made sure to hold eye contact with Dabi while he spoke, hopefully getting his point across. Dabi chuckled to himself. I am not interested in hauling around a snot-nosed kid. Don't worry about me. The scared man turned to the end of the alley. This way. He waved Izuku over. The three made their way to the convenience store. Dabi brought 2 ice cream, and Oboro stared longingly at Izuku's. I promise to buy you one tomorrow, Izuku signed to the ghost when Dabi had his back turned. Rude! You know I can't eat anything while I'm dead. Oboro crossed his arms in front of his chest. Izuku blinked. Yes, you can. He licked his ice cream, which was threatening to melt over the edge of the cone. If I lend you some of my energy, you should be able to finish one. I'll just make sure to get a good night's rest after. Sparkles shone in Oboro's eyes. You would do that for me? At Izuku's nod, he continued. Thanks, man, you're the best. I haven't had anything to eat in years. Izuku had to keep from laughing at the ghost's antics, especially since he felt Dabi's eyes on him. Do you think we could get some mochi too? The vanilla ones. Those were my favorite growing up, and I would Oboro was accidentally cut off by Dabi. Izuku's head quickly whipped around when he heard the gruff voice. What's a kid like you doing out here so late at night? Don't you have parents to take care of you? Swallowing the ice cream in his mouth, Izuku leaned against his free hand. Nope, he poked the pea. I live alone. I haven't seen my parents in years. The light tone Dabi had been speaking in earlier faded as he sat up. Seriously? Damn, kid. You have anywhere to stay? Izuku took a bite of his cone before speaking. Yep, I'm all good. I make a lot of money turning in criminals, so I have my own apartment. You really shouldn't give out your living arrangement to random strangers, Oboro piped from Izuku's side. It's not very safe. Izuku ignored the ghost as he watched Dabi huff. Good, he said dryly. If you ever need a place to stay, let me know. He waved for Izuku to nod. What do you do anyways? Oh, that's easy. I just dig up dirt on criminals. You should give it a try sometimes. Izuku offered. If you have a computer, that's not that hard. Just start with turning in random criminals, and eventually the police will start asking you for your help. That's when you start charging them. Just don't email the Musatafu station because that's where I get all my work. Dabi nodded along. Izuku couldn't tell if he was taking his words to the heart. Izuku, you should really start heading home. If you stay up any later, you're going to sleep through an alarm, and I'm not waking you up. Oboro jabbed Izuku's arm. The younger teen had to keep himself from swatting the ghost hand. Pretending to check a watch, Izuku clicked his teeth. I should really get going. See you around? Dabi nodded. See you around, kid. The man returned his own ice cream. Izuku jumped down from the roof onto the fire escape, Oboro once again trailing behind him. You really need to stop doing dangerous stuff. It's going to get you killed one day. Oboro chastised. Izuku shrugged. I mean, I would rather go out with a bang, but you do you. The ghost gazed hardened. Izuku, I'm serious. I died when I was around your age, and I regret it every day. If I had been more careful, I might have survived, but I was reckless, and it cost me. Any day now, the same things is going to happen to you. Izuku did not respond, an odd, uncomfortable feeling welling in his gut. He really should take Oboro's words to heart. On one day, he was going to get himself killed, and he's afraid of why he's not worried about it. Izuku sat in his homeroom exhausted. It was his fault for staying up super late talking to Dabi. Oboro had warned him that he would be tired, but Izuku just ignored him. It turns out Oboro was right, and apparently felt the need to remind Izuku about it every time the younger teen tried to start a conversation. Unfortunately for Izuku, Oboro was as chipper as ever, currently chatting away with Shoda. Even though the two were being very loud, Izuku couldn't force himself to break out their conversation and risk Oboro's mood plummeting. Professor Mike was also being loud, and he hadn't even started teaching yet. One of Izuku's classmates was currently speaking with their excited teacher. His name was Itachi Fujiwara, if Izuku remembered correctly. The loud chatter fell quiet as the bell chimed, announcing the beginning of a class. The only people still conversing were the two ghosts in the corner, but only Izuku could hear them. Cheers screeched across the floor as Class 1C made their way to their seats. Once everyone was situated, President Mike cleared his throat and began speaking. Alrighty, I have a big announcement to make. The sports festival is on the horizon, and you will all be participating. The class had a split reaction. Some people groaned while others cheered. Izuku could simply pick out the athletic students just by looking at the ones grinning ear to ear, with the exception being Shinzo. The purple boy was grinning. It was the same terrifying grin he had shown off yesterday. Izuku doubted it was there because Shinzo loved sports, but rather that he was thrilled for a chance to get into the hero course. Izuku himself was actually excited for the festival. When he was younger, he had always liked watching the sports festival. It didn't matter if he was at home or in the hospital. Izuku had always found a way to watch it. If he was at home, he just needed to make sure his mother was in a good mood. If she wasn't, she wouldn't turn it on for him, which Izuku had learned at a very young age. When Izuku was staying at the hospital, he just needed to make sure to ask the right nurse. Most of them had been mean, but there were one or two that he liked. Izuku bets that he still has some of his old notebooks where he had drawn himself in the sport festival. Younger Izuku would scream if he found out that he actually would get to participate one day. Izuku's reminiscence was cut short by Hitoshi turning around in his chair so he could face the younger teen. President Mike had finished speaking while Izuku had been lost in his thoughts, and the teacher had decided to give his students a few minutes to converse with each other. Shinzo pulled out the plan they had been working on the day prior. The paper was slitted in quickly scribbled words that Izuku could hardly make out. Shinzo's handwriting was truly atrocious. Luckily, Izuku remembered everything they had discussed the day before. The two had gone into great detail planning how they would hide the activation for Shinzo's quirk. They had discussed that waiting to use his quirk during the final matches would be better, as his opponent wouldn't know what to expect. They had also planned for Izuku to make it to the final round, so they could stage a fight with a fake quirk. Shinzo pointed to a chunk of the scribbles. I don't know how we're going to do this. Izuku squinted at the paper and realized Shinzo was pointing at Izuku's role in their plan. How are we going to fake an emitter's quirk? Izuku grinned slightly. That's the easy part, because heroic students have more time to practice their quirk and the other courses don't. Other students are permitted to bring in any support item they create themselves, which is generally geared towards the support students, but there is nothing in rules that says Gen Ed students can't. Shinzo blinked. You've read the rules? Izuku raised an eyebrow. You haven't? Aren't you worried about breaking them and again getting expelled? Kids like us need to make sure we're following the rules perfectly, or we could get expelled, especially from a school like UA. I don't think UA is discriminatory like that. If it was, don't you think we would have already been expelled for the threats you made to those boys yesterday? Shinzo rested his chin on his fist, which was propped up on his elbow. Izuku shrugged. I would rather be safe than sorry. Shinzo glared slightly before he swiftly smoothed out his expression. It's great you know all this stuff, but how is it supposed to help me fake a quirk? Izuku didn't answer right away, but instead pulled out his notebook. The collection of papers was slid across the table, and Shinzo leaned in on his chair to get a better look. Is that a ray gun? Shinzo asked, jabbing the blueprints with his finger. Sure is, Izuku cheered. I have the real thing back in my apartment. I still need to test it, but we could do that after school. I was planning to painting it, but I can wait. Any idea for colors? When Shinzo did not respond, Izuku looked up from the notebook. The purple teen was staring at Izuku with wide eyes. Izuku blinked nervously before waving a hand in his friend's face. Hello, Earth to Shinzo, Izuku said when his movements didn't break Shinzo out of his stupor. The other boy jolted, which caused Izuku to instinctively flinch away. Shinzo slammed his hand back on the table. You built an entire ray gun? Shinzo asked in disbelief. He continued to rant when Izuku nodded. Why are you even in this course? You're some sort of super genius. You should be in the support squad at least. I don't know why you decided to settle for Gen Ed when you could be doing way more. Shinzo's hand had left the table and were waving around wildly, causing Izuku to shrink in his chair slightly. Sweats began to pull at the back of Izuku's neck as he felt the curious eyes of his classmates. Obviously concerned with the commotion, Oboro floated over to check what was going on. Izuku caught his eye before turning back to an exasperated Shinzo. Izuku felt a cold hand brush his shoulder. He was entirely grateful for Oboro's support. Out of the corner of his other eye, Izuku could see Shora glaring at Shinzo. She looked like she was about to pounce on the taller teen. Izuku caught her eyes and slightly shook his head. She huffed before backing up slightly. Shinzo seemed to realize he was only stressing out the green net and stopped talking. When Shinzo's arm stopped waving, Izuku straightened his posture. Shinzo offered a quiet apology, but Izuku just waved him off. The railgun wasn't really hard to build, so I wouldn't call myself a genius. So, how do you feel about testing it out? You need to have a good idea on how to use it if you're going to pretend it's your quirk, Izuku whispered, not wanting his classmates to overhear. Yeah, that sounds so cool, but can you please confirm the plan, because I'm very lost. Shinzo clapped his hands all together as he spoke, shaking them every once in a while. Oh yeah, sorry about that. Izuku apologized, leaning forward so he could hear better. Okay, here's the plan. And this is the end of chapter 10. I promise you I've not abandoned it. I plan to record all of the chapters that are going to come out and had already come out. I thank you very much for sticking with me and for listening to this. So, yeah, thank you once again and have a great night or day. Bye bye.